Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special book-based interview where today we talk to author Curtis Ippolito and freelance writer Nicole Larson. Both have accumulated achievements in their fields and are also part of a writing chapter called Partners in Crime. Partners in Crime is part of a writing organization called Sisters in Crime that dedicates itself to promoting different perspectives in the crime genre. Nicole and Curtis serve as the president and vice president for Partners in Crime here in San Diego. But before we get started, if you'd like to follow Curtis and Nicole on their journey, please check out Curtis's website at curtisippolito.com and his Instagram, Curtis_SD. If you're interested in the chapter Curtis and Nicole are a part of, please check out sistersincrimesd.org. And finally, if you enjoyed this interview, please drop a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Nicole and Curtis, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.
Of course, of course. So I would love to just start off by asking you guys about your professions. Nicole, I wanted to ask you what made you want to be a journalist, and then after Curtis, if you don't mind, if you can just share what made you want to be a writer and an author.
Uh, I I became a freelance journalist quite by chance. I moved to San Diego from Washington D.C. Just 1999, just before the turn of the century. And as I've told is common in San Diego, it's hard for mid-career woman professional to find work unless they're in the technical field, which I'm not. And I'd done a lot of different things before I came to San Diego. I had run a multilingual information service. I had um, run a visitors information bureau in Arlington, Virginia, and I had spent 10 years um, running two historic house museums for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and also spent many years working in politics and campaigns, which I was very, very eager to get out of because I was totally burnt out. In Virginia, we'd had elections every year and many special elections. So I was just ready to get out of politics and campaigns. And I'd done issued advocacy too. Um, so I'd always written everything, every job I'd had, I'd always involved writing, and I loved writing. I'd always wanted to be a writer from the time I was a little kid. So I took a feature writing program at UCSD, and I got my first two pieces written, my first two class pieces published. So that's I sort of that took off, and I started freelancing. And what I found is that my very broad experience in many different fields turned out to be extremely useful because I could write about almost anything. And even if I don't have any expertise in it, like I I'm not a gardener, but I'd run historic gardens, and um, I love gardens. Um, it gave me the tools to interview people, ask questions, write about what they're doing, and benefit from that. So that's how I got into it. And just started freelancing, and I written for many different publications, most of which have ceased publication. And primarily right now for the San Diego Union Tribune, our city newspaper. That's how I got into it. But I say the tools were a lifetime of working. Oh, I'd gone to cooking school too, I should say. So that gave me the tools to write about food, food and cooking, which I do regularly.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. Before I say anything, Curtis, if you don't mind sharing your story, and then after we have a conversation about everything that we've just spoken about.
Sure. By day, I'm a writer in marketing and communications, and I've held several different jobs over the last few years. One for the biggest hospital system here in San Diego, Sharp Healthcare, and then the Salk Institute, where it's the scientific research facility that Jonas Salk founded. And what led me into that was I went to school to become a newspaper reporter, and I was for a few years after graduation. And like Nicole, that journalism background really prepared me for not only my day job now in writing and communications, but as a fiction writer, writing novels, writing short stories, it really helped. That education helped me learn the value of deadlines, of
Mm-hmm.
interviewing, listening for great quotes, which transfers really well into writing good dialogue. So I thought when I went to school that I would become a fiction writer and I wanted to write books. And I thought in my naivety that being a newspaper reporter would be the path that into that direction. And it kind of was in the long run, but it took a while to get there. And but like I said, I wouldn't trade it for anything because it did give me the skills that I have now. And I've done a little bit of freelancing too, like Nicole over the years, but don't let Nicole under sell herself. She's also an award-winning feature writer. And just recently, I think you won a couple of awards, didn't you?
6.
Yeah, six, just a few.
Wow.
Including sweeping all 3 top awards for, in fact, all 3 awards in the architecture and design area, which amuses me no end because I say I don't have any background in that other than working in historic preservation.
But I think you made a great point earlier is when you are writing for newspapers and magazines, you have to be an expert in all these different areas, or at least learn enough to make
Mm-hmm.
yourself dangerous, right? And so I
Exactly.
have the same skill set. I know a little bit about this, a little bit about that,
Mhm.
not enough to go into any of those industries,
Right.
but just enough to help inform readers and give them a picture of
Yeah.
whatever the story may be that I'm trying to write about.
I think the key is knowing enough and being open enough to answer questions. And I always tell people, when I, especially when I write about gardening or design, um, I am not a gardener. I don't know very much about this, but you're the expert, and they have always been very generous in sharing their knowledge. And that's been my experience with just about everything I've written about and when I've done profiles. If you ask the right questions, and usually open-ended questions, people will share their story. They will tell you what you need to know. And um, if your question is coming from the wrong place, they'll tell you that. As long as you're nice and open. And I always find nice works.
Right.
Yes, and
Uh,
I think the same is true for fiction writing. You
mhm.
make yourself open, you allow yourself to uh, ask questions and be dumb so that
Yeah,
the people who know better can, inform you, then it's going to make your story so much more rich.
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for sharing each of your guys' stories. And the reason I wanted to ask this question was because, I was always brought up with the idea that, at an early age, you have to answer this question of like, what do you want to do? And then you have to pretty much structure your whole life towards doing it. And what I really loved about your guys' stories is that it didn't really add up that way, which is a good thing because, like you guys just said, it allowed you guys to not only have different backgrounds and things, but allowed you guys to understand the world in a unique way, to be able to
yeah.
communicate what you wanted to communicate to your audience. And Nicole, I think it's great that, you started off your journey kind of wanting to get out of politics and you come to San Diego and you're interested in so many things. But I felt like, from your experience going to cooking school, being, a little bit of a writer, a journalist, also being in political campaigns, I felt like you had an element to understand people. And when you understand
Oh,
people, it
absolutely.
allows you to be able to communicate on their behalf on things that they're professionals at. And I feel like that's the same thing with writing, Curtis. The way that you're talking about wanting to communicate, the idea of pretending dumb that your audience could be like, no, we know better. This is how this is supposed to work. But it's intentional. Your ability to understand humans is what allows you guys to be able to create the things that you do. And especially do great things like winning awards. I mean, Curtis, you also won an award for your novel as well. So, I mean, you guys are both doing amazing things. And I think it's great to know that amazing things can come from messy beginnings where you don't really have to have an immediate great start to things to find out what you want to do. Sometimes it's just having that patience to find out along the road, hey, what can you do with what you already have?
Yeah, it's applying the skills you have, but I think the most important skill in journalism and writing in general is listening to what others have to say.
Mm,
You ask the questions, yes, but you need to, I call it active listening. This was what I found when I did issues advocacy in politics. You have to listen to what people are saying. And active listening, I found that I could do incredible phone interviews with people whom I wanted to contact congressmen and senators on my cause's behalf, and they would do it because I would I would listen to them, and they would respond. It's always this interaction, and the same thing with good writing. Um, and use applying your everything you have learned in whatever field, and just being a human being. Um, that I think is the key to successful writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
right. Right. No, thank you so much for adding on with that. I think that's a great point. I think active listening and then also allowing yourself to work on your writing structure as you're going about
Mhm,
it. I feel like people
mhm.
sometimes are disheartened because they try to write and then it's not what they expected it to be. And then they take that as the sign as like, well, maybe I shouldn't have started. But the reality is that anything that you start off with is going to be messy. The whole point of it is that you're trying to refine it as time goes.
Right.
Right.
I, I think the one thing that nobody ever tells you about writing, at least not when I was starting out, when I was in school and I was writing essay, I went to an English public school
Hmm.
where everything was, it was not fact based, it was essay based. And nobody ever told me then or later on when I was, um, doing writing or going to the feature writing program, don't expect perfection your first draft. It's not there. Good writing comes with revision,
Hmm.
and learning how to write and learning the tricks of writing. But don't expect perfection on your first go. Some people can just write off the top of their heads. I can't. I go through as many as 10 drafts for everything I write.
Right.
Um, but people don't tell you that. And I think that needs to be stressed.
Yeah.
It's revision and rewriting is what brings good writing,
Right.
creates good writing.
Absolutely. I think also social media has a little bit of a bad habit of only promoting the perfection, and it doesn't really
Mhm.
show the messy behind the scenes moments where you're trying to perfect that craft or you're trying to really hone in on your style of writing. So I think advice like that, Nicole, I think is really important for people that are watching this because, you want to encourage the idea of messing up intentionally. I mean, not intentionally, but kind of going about it the best way you can, seeing the imperfections instead of being dissuaded and being like, okay, I have to go away from this. Kind of
Yeah.
being more encouraged to kind of say, hey, you know what? I can fix this. Let me see what I can do to become a better writer. And I totally can see that process with both of you guys, like through the accolades
Mhm.
and just the work that you guys have both produced. You don't get to where you guys are unless you put in the work of wanting to revise and constantly putting the work in trying to be a better
Mhm.
writer. So I think your guys' advice really speaks true to who you guys are as creatives, and I really appreciate that. But mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, one thing I would add to that is don't be afraid to walk away from something you're working on.
Mm,
Often, I tend to write later at night, or at least that's when I get my first steam or final steam, and that I have ADHD, and that is I'm told is typical of that. But what I'll often find that something's not coming together, I'll turn off the computer, I'll walk away from it and go make coffee for the morning. We have a timer, and I'll find that when I'm getting just finished making coffee, a whole new beginning has come to me, a whole new approach because I've turned off the computer, I've walked away. I'll write down what's come into my head, and then the next morning I will find that new approach works, and I'm able to get over the block.
right. Right. No, thank you so much for adding on with that. I think that's true. That's happened to me multiple times where I'm
Mhm.
writing something and I'm like, this is the ugliest thing I've ever written. I need to put this down and throw it away before someone finds out. And then I'll go out for a walk or,
Yeah.
just go for a run, make something. And then in the middle of it, you kind of get this this epiphany where like, wait a minute, I know what I'm missing, and you go back and you're like, wait, this all of a sudden
Mhm.
makes sense. And
Yeah.
I think the key is to have that sense of patience with yourself where you allow yourself again to kind of go through things instead of having it be done in a short amount of time, seeing it as like
Yeah.
a process or more of like a lifestyle instead, where you're continuously improving and that there isn't really a deadline on how you need to go about perfecting or just improving what you want to improve. It's just allowing yourself to kind of go through that journey.
Yeah.
And I know we talk about who we are as creatives right now, but I'm also curious. We're partners in crime, sisters in crime. If there's one thing that's key about this, it's writing that has to do with the crime genre. And I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask, when it comes to that specific subgenre of writing, what about it interests you guys enough to where you guys were wanting to be a part of partners in crime?
I think,
Curtis, why don't you start?
okay, sure. So I think for me, I would just always gravitated towards crime and mystery genres in films I watched or books I read. And then I was a crime reporter for a while out of college. So I covered the police and did the police blotter and all those things. So I was always kind of gravitating towards that world. And when I sat down to get serious about my fiction, I found that all my stories had a criminal bent. And I
Hmm.
think even more than just my interest in that is that's as close to reality of our daily lives from my background and from what I've observed that you get in literature. Like, you know, I'm most interested in how people who are underprivileged or cast aside by society or seemed, is deemed as less than in society, how they get through life
Mm.
and how they get through, they, work to try to better themselves or just simply survive. And so I think those types of stories always appealed to me, and those are the stories I want to tell.
Right.
When I was a reporter, I was doing it because I want to inform the public about these things that are going on in their community, or I want to check power, right? You want to hold, the powers that be accountable. And so all of that transfers into
Hmm.
crime writing
Yeah.
and writing about mysteries and crime. And so then how I got involved with Partners in Crime was I didn't even know that it existed. And I had been living in San Diego for a number of years. And Carl and I had met at a conference, and he just asked me if I wanted to join and told me what it was about. There was a group of like-minded individuals, writers and readers who really love the crime genre. And I said, sure, I'm all about that, the community and the like-mindedness. And I think we have a really great mix of people in the group. Some people who write the same subgenre as me, some who write cozies, some who read cozies, some who read mysteries. So it's a really great group of people that all support each other, and you learn so much, even if it's a writer that's not necessarily writing the same thing as you. You can learn so much from other people and their journeys.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got interested in mysteries. My father was a mystery writer, and I still have many of the books that he bought. Gosh, in the 40s and 50s. Some I think they even brought back from World War II.
Wow.
25-cent penguins, and I've held on to them. And he introduced me to the writer John Dixon Carr, whom um, whom I loved, and kept hold on to all of those books, and they've gone back and forth uh, across the Atlantic a couple times and cross country. But so I was introduced to it from an early age, and I never thought I would write or try to write mysteries. But I, in fact, never thought I'd try to write fiction. but suddenly I was got interested in it. And Partners in Crime started about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. I was part of the original launch board. I think I'm the last one or two are still on the board, um, who were in there at the beginning. And I did the programming for the first 4 years or thereabouts, and have still helped with that. What I've found is helpful, it's helped me because I'd never written fiction before, and writing fiction is much different from um, writing um, nonfiction or journalistic thing, where you have to be very, very spare, make every word count, and um, you're always chasing a deadline, which are very useful skills to bring to fiction writing. Um, However, it's different because you need to paint pictures more, and it's still the storytelling approach that I've always used in nonfiction. I'm telling somebody's story, or the story of a house, a garden, uh, a cooking style, whatever. It's for me, it's always storytelling, the who, the what, the why, what motivates people, and I think that's ties in with fiction writing. But through Partners in Crime, having heard from a number of writers of many different genres, from true crime to cozies and thrillers and whatever, you learn something from how people write, um, and um, what it takes. And we've also brought in experts, um, area experts, people, guns, policing, all different sorts of things, and we intersperse that with the writers. So it really can help people who are aspiring writers learn, um, how to write, and understand that everybody writes differently. That's the other important thing.
Right.
Don't let anybody tell you how to write. My husband keeps telling me that I have to have an outline. Can't work from an outline. Never could. Um, but how to write, how to develop your own way of writing, your own style, but also where to look for uh, the expertise, where to find information to flesh out your story and to make it accurate. So I think that's what you can find from an organization like Partners in Crime. And we find that the readers are also very interested in hearing from the writers about what they do, how they got to how they developed their story, and they like hearing from the area experts too. They like hearing about guns and um, medical examiners and that sort of thing. So I think it's good for both readers and writers.
Right. No, thank you so much. And Curtis, starting off with what you just shared earlier, you make a really great point about how crime, this, man, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about this, but I've never thought of crime being a human construct. And it essentially
Mm-hmm.
is, right? There's nothing in nature that defines crime. It's what we want it to be.
Right.
And because it's a form of perception, unfortunately, that perception also carries the biases of what groups of people are considered criminal and what groups of people are considered normal. And if we
That's
look
right.
at, there are other countries as well, but if we just focus on our country right now, there are clear examples that there are specific minority groups that do suffer from the criminal justice system. And,
Hmm.
Right.
there are people out there that don't see this criminal justice system being very biased on who it serves and who it doesn't serve. And I think that is such a unique form of understanding something that I feel like people initially accept as it being a standard or almost like a natural construct. I think growing up, I never once questioned what crime was. I just knew that there was this inherent sense of good and this sense of bad from what I have experienced in the world and what my family would teach me. And then from there, I assumed that was fact and I carried on. And then it's only when you become an adult and you start understanding it through examples of maybe journalism, news, politics, you start understanding that something that you think was inherent and something that was just, so concrete is actually really flexible and is very determined by the people that, decide on what this definition is. And I actually spent a moment of time in my undergrad studying the criminal justice system here in America, and even understanding, harsh torture tactics like solitary confinement, and how they use these forms of practice not to quote unquote, create forms of rehabilitation, but it's a fear tactic to make these people feel like they can't, not only can they do anything about it, but they don't have a voice, and I get that, people sometimes believe that if you do commit a crime, your voice shouldn't be as promoted as others. But there's also, with this form of, torture, sometimes the removal of rehabilitation sometimes occurs as well, where the people themselves end up losing hope and thinking that they can be a better person. And what I love about the crime genre is that it kind of allows a hidden form of communication where you're kind of able to talk about these themes without initially, I guess, without kind of loudly throwing it at someone's face. It's more
Right.
developed within the details of the writing. And I'm actually reading this novel right now. It's called The Bluest Night by author Aaron Philip Clarke. And
Good friend of mine.
oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
reading
he's a
his.
great guy, great writer.
Right, I'm reading his third installment to the Trevor Finnegan series,
Hmm.
and I haven't read crime like this in a while, but having the protagonist to be a black detective that's used to working with a corrupt system like the LAPD, that alone creates so many opportunities for interesting dialogue, and that's something that Aaron really focuses on, is this constant hypocritical system of people thinking they're doing good by committing acts of evil sometimes. And
Right.
that is what I really love about crime. And I think, people like Nicole, what you were sharing, that what this organization does is kind of bring people that are very interested in that aspect of writing together by bringing in experts and even allowing readers to talk to writers on what made them want to go ahead and pick up the pen and write a story as, as intense as what crime stories tend to encapture. And, I think another point that Nicole brought up that I think is amazing is that, when you want to finally dip your toes into this world of crime writing, I totally agree. You shouldn't have anybody tell you how to write. Of course, there are ways that you can improve, but I never once thought about that weird juxtaposition where you want to be individual in your writing style, but you also want to find ways that you can get better. And but you don't want to overwrite what you're really good at as an individual writer.
Mhm.
So it's like, how do you learn that ability to distinguish, hey, this is what should stay with me, and this is something that I think can move around, or this is something that can be improved. And I think that's a really great way of kind of sharing that message of what makes partners in crime so important, is that it allows readers in this complicated genre to be able to understand when you're doing something right and when you're doing something that could possibly be improved on based on what the criticism is in the room with people around you that are also doing the same thing. That's really awesome. I really love that.
I
Yeah, I
would
think that's.
also, yeah, encourage people to join a writers group.
Mm.
Hmm.
Um, I've been in a writers group now, I don't know how long, it was probably 7 or 8 years, which we formed from members of Partners in Crime. And it's, if it's a good writers group, it's a safe space.
Right.
And people will give you constructive criticism and tell you what works and what doesn't work. And it really helps you hone your skills. Um, One other thing I did when I decided I was going to get serious about this, I did NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month,
Mm.
and I wrote the shittiest first draft, absolutely shittiest first draft, to borrow Anne Lamont's expression, shitty first draft. But it taught me so much in that I didn't know how to write dialogue. I didn't know how to get people out of situations. I needed help with plotting, and it taught me what I didn't know. So it was a useful exercise. And some of those elements I've incorporated into other things that I've done. Um, and the other thing I would say is that um, don't be afraid to use examples from your own life experience. And as I keep telling people, mystery writing is a wonderful way to get revenge on people who have harmed you or that have driven you crazy.
Hmm.
And you make them the villain or the victim in a crime novel. You can, it's a perfect way to get revenge or vengeance without doing any real harm,
Right.
committing a crime, and they'll never know about it, but you'll have a private chuckle.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, now I know if in Nicole's book there's a name for Nathen. If there's a character named Nathen, it's a personal thing. She's trying to she must have not liked the interview. It's an interviewer that ends up becoming a victim of a serial killer. I'm like, okay, maybe I need
Yeah.
to email her and ask her how everything's going.
No, I don't use names, but characteristics, general
Hmm.
personas. Yeah,
Right. No.
but it's great, and they'll never recognize themselves.
No, but I totally agree with what you're saying about how essentially your writing is a expression of who you are, and it's okay to
Yeah,
kind of be personal a little bit with the details
yeah,
without it being intrusive on who you are. You can kind of have
yeah,
fun with your experience, the people that you've also experienced in life, good or bad. And I think that's the key of storytelling, right? It's that you have to first experience humanity, and then you use that to translate it, and then communicate that humanity to other people through fictional settings
yeah,
with real themes. And I guess that's what the struggle is with fiction, is constantly dipping your toes in the fake and the real to create something that is just good
yeah,
enough to fool somebody, being like, wow, this is actually something that could really happen. And
yeah,
that's the fun of it as well. People do that all the time with movies and other forms of media. I think the immersion factor, if you can get someone hooked on something that isn't really existing in real life, you're really doing your job as a creative. You're making people feel like they can
yeah,
get lost in your world.
yeah.
But thank you guys again. And Curtis, I know you want to add something to that point as well?
Oh no, I think we were talking about the group Partners in Crime,
Hmm.
and what it the value, and I was just going to add that groups like Partners in Crime and Sisters in Crime, they are great because they meet the writer where they are. If
Yeah,
you're an emerging writer or if you're a seasoned writer, there are so many resources
yeah,
and tools at your disposal that no matter where you are in your journey, you can progress from
hmm,
there if you're open to learning.
Awesome.
yeah. Yeah, one thing I would add, to be a member of the local chapter, any local chapter, you also need to be a member of national. And people say, well, why do I need to do that? Well, it's a symbiotic relationship. They support the local chapter with money and services and expertise. But there's another tool. They have a series of webinars which
Hmm.
they archive, and um, at the and you can have, if you're a member of Sisters in Crime, you can go into that archive and find a webinar that might answer the questions that you have need answered. I remember when I was working on one story that was really about the CIA. There was a former CIA agent who gave a program about what it was like to work in the CIA, and it was wonderful. And she was very willing to take and answer questions. You could email her, etc. And there are those resources that you get from an organization like Sisters in Crime, and even from the local speakers. I know that many of our members have connected with them, after the meetings, and they've been willing to answer questions, and um, they can run sections by to say, does this seem right? Is this accurate? Is it all wrong?
Right.
It's just a wonderful tool, and it's very personal.
I love that. And so, if someone were to want to be a part of this chapter, they would first have to be a member of Sisters in Crime, and then they can
Yeah,
choose what chapter or local chapter they want to be a part of from there.
Right.
or
Or
many.
many.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
There's several members who are members of many
Oh,
chapters.
Yeah,
wow. Okay. So you don't even have, do you have to be in the local area to be a part of the local chapter?
no,
Oh, okay.
No.
That's
no,
so cool.
no.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We
Awesome.
have members. We have members. From the East
Hmm.
Coast. We have at our sessions, we have had people attending from Canada, Australia. Um, yeah, you don't have to be. You can just be, especially for Zoom or hybrid meetings. You can just sign in on the Zoom link,
Okay.
which and the national organization has provided us a Zoom subscription where we can have as many as 1,000 people in our sessions. We've never reached that, but it's the potential.
Yeah, no, that's the best part about being a part of any
Yeah,
local chapter, right? Is the room for growth and the room for
and national
impact, right? To
organization.
really
Yeah, yeah.
touch the hearts and the brains of writers that really want to go out there and create a, something. I think, whenever you decide to become a creative, whether it's like painting or making a movie or being a writer, I think there's a lot of vulnerability that goes into that process because you're allowing yourself to be criticized for something that could potentially feel so personal. And I think it's really it feels so genuine to know that in this world there are organizations out there and chapters that serve people that want to, kind of go into this process, but maybe they just need resources or just a guiding hand to kind of be like, hey, like this is something that you can do. And I'm really happy that there is something like Partners in Crime out there where, if you just want to get started in crime writing, you love crime, you want to try it out, you don't know where to start, you can join a room full of people that are just that once either asked the same question as you or they're asking at the same time you are, and from there you guys are
Yeah.
able to create like a special moment to learn on how you guys can
Hmm.
express yourselves. um
Yeah.
And I'll point out a lot of our meetings are free. You don't have to be a
mhm.
member, so you can try it out and see if it's for
Yeah.
you. Lurk in the back and see
Yeah.
if you like that chapter before joining.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing is that with the national organization contacts, we have heard from very, very internationally prominent authors. Sarah Paretsky, who is one of the founders of Sisters in Crime, probably coming on for 40 years now. But we've heard from her, we've heard from just all kinds of people, and that you would not have any opportunity to hear from
Hmm.
normally.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'll definitely try to put that in the description. Not only the link for Sisters in Crime, but of course for your guys' chapter as well.
Mhm.
And I think, again, it'd be really great to promote this because,
Yeah.
again, I 26 years old and it was until I met Carl that I realized that this was even a thing, and if this is with me, I can't imagine how many other writers are out there or just other people that just want to get started in something feeling like this is such
Mhm.
a independent journey. It's really not.
Hmm.
It could also be a very, a very cooperative journey with a lot of togetherness and union in terms of
Yeah.
making something.
It, it's how you want to do it.
Hmm.
First, it can be quite social, um, but the ultimate writing journey is, it's putting your butt in the chair
Got
and
to do the
sitting down
work.
and
Gotta do
writing.
the work.
Yeah,
Still got to
doing the
do the
work,
work.
showing
Yep.
up. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah. But there is help available. It doesn't have to be totally isolated,
Right.
um, and solitary.
Right. No, thank you so much for saying that. And I guess this kind of leads to my next question. Besides, of course, sitting down and doing the work, I wanted to ask each of you guys, what is your advice for new writers? Of course, besides being a part of a writing organization, and, I know you guys have so much experience writing, if there's one little small bullet point of feedback that you can just give in general to people that are just starting to write, what would that something be?
Curtis, you want to go take that one first?
Sure. I would say the number one thing is just read and read
Mm-hmm.
and read and read, and especially read in the genre that you want to write in.
Mm,
Uh, that way you can learn the rules, the limitations of that genre, but also read outside that genre because
Mm-hmm.
many different genres can inform a
Mm-hmm.
broader worldview, right? So definitely read as much as possible. And then I would say, yes, find a community, whether that's in person, online, at conferences, but find your people because while creating a novel, writing a novel or short story may be a solitary act, you need people that are
Mm-hmm.
like-minded that you can share with and they can share with you and fulfill that community aspect that's so important. So that would be my two things.
thank you, Curtis.
Yeah, yeah, and two things. As you mentioned, as Curtis mentioned, read outside the genre. Also, there are other organizations which provide excellent, essentially writing tools or training. Um, I remember one of our members, our founding president, Kathy Cravat. said that she learned so much from the seminars from romance writers, that they had really great uh, workshops. Now, I think that organization has had some issues. I'm not sure what its status is. The one I found very helpful, when I first started out, I thought I was going to write children's mysteries. And I was involved with the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which had monthly meetings here in San Diego, a national organization. Went to one of their conferences. I found that the skills that I learned through them were as valuable or more valuable than anything else. It's very hard. It's much harder writing for children. People think it's easy. It's much, much harder, and it's got to be much more succinct. But the tools and training were wonderful. And the other thing that I would say, as I said earlier, don't expect perfection on your first draft. Um, if you expect everything to come off your pen or your fingers perfect, you're dreaming. It's revision, revision, revision.
Right. Thank you guys so much for not only sharing your experiences as, as what you guys were doing before you got into Partners in Crime, but to also share your experience in Partners in Crime and how it not only helped you, but how you can help others. But also just ending with, the advice that you guys have, you're able to give right now just from your experiences of just being in your own journeys. Because I think, again, the act of choosing to do something creative is a very modest, and I think it's a very special journey that I feel like anybody should at least take at least once. It doesn't have to be in writing, of course, but just try to put yourself out there creatively. I think in any way is really valuable. And I think it's so warming to know that when you decide to take that step, number one, you're not alone, and number two, you're not going to be great at it at the first try, but that's okay. I think if you just keep those two in mind, and at the same time you just keep at it, like what we just said, sitting down and actually doing the work, I think it's not a matter of if you'll get something that you're proud of. It's a matter of when, because you're doing the work as you're learning, as you're meeting other people, as you're gathering resources. And I think through that, another big thing that I feel like people should also remember is that again, it's all about them. They should believe in themselves and believe that they have that opportunity to kind of create something special, even if the first draft is shitty, even if you're going to these organization events and maybe sometimes you feel like oh man, like there's just something else that's missing. That's an opportunity to ask more questions. That's an opportunity to make more friends. That's an opportunity to go back home and maybe trying to draft something else and see how that works. And I love that the more that you expose yourself to not only literature but to more people that are in the same boat as you, you might gain more and more of a skill set to allow yourself to be the writer that you want to be. And I think that's such a warm thing. I don't know. I think, I know the seasons are, it's like Thanksgiving, Christmas is coming, it's a time to be with family and friends. I think that's such a great way to kind of think about writing right now. It's just that, hey, you're going to be home. It's raining. It's going to be snowing wherever anybody is. So, while the winter is happening, it's like, you might as well take advantage of it and just try to create something while we have the time.
Yeah, there's just two more points I'd make.
Sure.
One is that I meet many people. I tell them I'm a writer, and they say, they assume that I've published a lot of books and that I've made a lot of money from writing. Don't expect to make a lot of money from writing, at least initially. Mm-hmm. And most of my friends, I think Curtis will confirm this, are struggling to make money off the books they've published. And the other thing I would say, and always with a laugh, instant success in the field of writing is 10 years.
Oh man, that is a great quote, Nicole. I love that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so true. I think in general, if you go into anything and your first priority is making money, I think you're kind of selling yourself short by thinking like that. I think the best creatives in the world are the ones that do it because they want to, and then money ends up becoming a side effect of it because of how great that product ends up becoming. So I think, yeah, like absolutely. I think, that's so funny. Instant success. Yeah, I think, if you want to be successful in a creative route like this, I think there's a reason. why the best-selling author is usually older than, someone that's in their teenage years, that's just, that releases their first novel and it's a best time seller. It's usually not that, right? It's someone that
There
has
are rare exceptions,
right.
but they're relatively rare.
Right, absolutely.
And David Baldacci, who spoke to BoucherCon in San Diego a couple of years ago, hit the jackpot with his first novel.
Mm.
But he was a practicing lawyer. He was using his legal expertise as the basis for his novel. And but that's rare.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare.
Right, right. But hey, just because it's rare doesn't mean it's not worth giving it a shot, right? And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
It's all about just going for it. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, I just want to say, Curtis and Nicole, thank you guys again for sitting down with me and not only talking about Partners in Crime, but your guys' story. Again, to anybody that's watching, please check out Curtis's website, curtisippolito.com, and his Instagram, curtis_SD. Also, please check out sistersincrimesd.org if you guys are interested in Sisters in Crime, and then from there you'll be able to find the other chapters as well, which includes Partners in Crime. Also, please drop a like and again subscribe to our YouTube channel. But Nicole and Curtis, thank you guys so much for speaking with me. It's an honor to sit down with you guys and just talk about something as fun as crime fiction or just crime writing in general. And I cannot wait to see you guys again.
Thank you so much.
It was great.
It's been fun.
Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you guys.
Very much so.
Thank you.